Again, and in this third tutorial about developing Android application, and I'm teaching you about the fundamentals that you need to know about Android application development using Kotlin. So in this tutorial I'm gonna explain you about the amazing concept called Gradle. Okay, so what is a Gradle actually? The Gradle is a build tool that we use to configure, actually to build, configure and manage your application dependencies. Okay, so we're gonna discuss about this concept in this tutorial. And actually, the before going through the Gradle build system and understanding more in detail, I want to tell you guys that the what is the principally, like basically, if you remember in our previous tutorials, we downloaded Android Studio, and when we installed Android Studio, all the necessary Android libraries were also downloaded, right? Like we also downloaded Android platform SDK, and however, not only this Android platform SDK, software development kit libraries, which is provided by Android, not only these libraries are used to create the applications. Okay, so whenever you create the application, not only the Android SDK platform tools libraries are used there, right? I mean to say this one, right, guys? So you also need other libraries, right? So and what are the tools, and so which is the build tool that is used to manage all these dependencies and external libraries or internal libraries is a Gradle build tool. Okay, and it is pretty much, it looks like this one, guys, this one. And okay, this is a pretty simple build.gradle file. In the it is, there are two different kinds. One is a project level, and the next one I will be talking about is a app level Gradle file, Okay, so let's go in detail about what is a Gradle. Gradle is actually a multi-purpose build tool, okay, that Android Studio uses to build your application. So by default, Android Studio uses Groovy, a dynamically typed Java virtual machine JVM language, to configure the build process and allows easy dependency management, so you can add libraries to a project and specify different versions, right? Versioning, as you can see here, you can specify different versions. That means you are loading different plugins of different versions. You can basis on the requirement of your project, you can change your version, right? And uh, so actually, not only you can use Groovy as a default language, but you can also configure to, I mean, you can configure your Android Studio also with Kotlin to configure your build. You can configure, use Kotlin as a build configuration language, not Groovy. You can also do that, but by default we'll be using Groovy to configure our build system, right? So we'll be using Groovy as a language. This is a Groovy, as you can see here, it's in Groovy. And the files that this build and configuration information is used, okay, so actually it is named as a build.gradle file, as you can see here. You see, this is a app level, like this is a project level build.gradle file, whereas this is a app level build.gradle file. You can see the difference just by just checking out the name here, right? You see in the parenthesis, you can see here. And okay, so let's see what is the project level build.gradle file. So it looks like this one, as you can see here. It's a top level build.gradle file where you can add configuration options common to all sub projects or module, as you can see here already. And not only that, As you can see here, I have, for the moment, I'm just implementing the plugins here. Like I am implementing these three different plugins, and the first one is called com.android.application. What is this? This is so what is like, actually, you need to understand that Gradle works on a plugin system, so you can write your own. Actually, you can write your own plugin that does some particular task or a series of tasks and plug it into your build pipeline. But for the moment, we are using automatic, the by default provided plugins by Android Studio. So we are implementing these three plugins. And what is these three plugins? So what is this first plugin? As you can see it by the ID, it's com.android.application. This plugin adds support to create an Android application. And what about this the com.android.library plugin? This enables us sub projects or module to be Android libraries. Okay, and you have also a JetBrains or org or JetBrains or Kotlin.android plugin. This provides us the integration and language support for Kotlin in the project. So Kotlin language support is provided by this plugin. Okay, and Android application creation is supported by this plugin, whereas like all the sub projects or modules to the Android library is created by this plugin, right? And also, like you see here, like you have, we have specified the version. Okay, and like also there is another concept here. There's a apply false statement. This statement of applying false statement enables this plugin only to the sub projects or module, only to the sub projects or module. Okay, so and not to the project root level. Okay, so that means that means these plugins are implemented only to sub projects or module. So that means not project root level. So this means these plugins are implemented. um, okay, let me write here. So apply false statement enables these plugins only to sub module sub projects, jacks or modules, and not to the project root level. Okay, so project root level doesn't implement these plugins. It is only implemented by the sub project or modules. uh, Actually, also this versioning is also applied, and similarly this versioning, this version specified is applied also to, actually it is applied to all sub projects or modules. Okay, so this is the version that you have specified here is applied to all sub projects or modules. Okay, so that's it, guys. Actually, this is all about the top level build.gradle file. Okay, so now let's switch on to the project or the app level build.gradle file. The build.gradle app is specified to your project configuration. So actually this is the module of our application, and this is for the entire project. Our project is Kotlin, so this is our module, the application module that we are using. Okay, so the build gradle that is inside this application module is the app level build gradle file. So it is in this format. As you can see here, it looks it is like this. Okay, And it consists of multiple variables, multiple values. Here it consists of plugins, the namespace. Okay, we will be discussing each and every concept here. You have a default configuration, the build types, the compile option, Kotlin options, build features, and finally the dependencies here. So let's go step by step. The plugin for Android and Kotlin are applied to your project here by ID in the plugins line. So you know the plugins are applied here. The plugins that was specified here was applied, as you can see here. The ID, you see the plugins from Android and Kotlin detailed in the root build.gradle file. The root build.gradle file has some plugins here, right? Which will be applied like this enables this plugin to the sub projects or modules. So this means you can use the plugins here, right? Using you apply your plugins to, by the ID plugin ID, right? So this is how it is done here. So this app module build.gradle is applying two plugins, as you can see here: com.android application plugin and org.netbrains.kotlin.android plugin, which is pretty much the first plugin. As I already told you, it's supposed to create the Android application, and this second plugin, it provides you all the language support for Kotlin in the project, integration and language support for Kotlin in the project. Okay, so that's it. And now we have now the this was the plugin block. The second is the Android block. The Android block provided by the com.android, the application plugin, is where you configure your Android specific configuration settings. So actually it's provided pretty much by the com.android.application plugin, and it helps you to configure your Android specific configuration. So what are these configuration settings? Is the first thing is the namespace. So this is the namespace of your application. What is a namespace? This is set, I mean, like, this is ID, or as kind of a is identifier, this is it's provided from the package name, and you specified when you create the project. It is used for generating build and resource identifiers, so when you create your build or resource identifiers, all these resource identifiers will be starting from this namespace. I would be just practically explaining you about later on, but everything will be starting from this namespace. Like, for example, this package name will be starting from that namespace, as you can see here. And that's why it's really important, because whenever you generate builds and resource identifiers, the initial namespace will be always this one. Okay, so now we have also the second setting is a compile SDK. This is used to define the API level the app has been compiled with, and the app can use the feature of this API and lower. So that means your API level the app has been compiled with. Whenever you build your application, it is compiled with this version 33. Okay, API level 33. So this is the compile SDK version, okay, on which your application is compiled with. And what is the default configuration? This is like kind of a base configuration of your application, like your minimum SDK version, that is 24, and the target SDK version is 33. Your compile SDK version should be always equal or greater than your target SDK version. Okay, so you have to be just careful about these two concepts. And your version code and version names, I like. Okay, so let's go about in step by step. What is the application ID? Application id is like also your app's package name, and is the app identifier that is used to use also in Google Play to uniquely identify your application. So your application is uniquely identified this by this app id. So that's why when you create a project, you have to be careful that this is not repeated. Okay, this is a very unique, it must be unique. Okay, because Google Play will take this application ID as identifier to identify your application. So it can but it can be changed to be different from the package name if required. Okay, so it is not necessary that it should be similar with your namespace. Okay, you can also make it differently. Okay, so it's not a problem. So what is a minimum SDK? It's like a minimum API level your app supports. So this will filter out all your application from being displayed in Google Play for devices that are lower than this. If devices lower than this will never see your application in Google Play, you know. So this is the filter. This is kind of a filter in which filters like your it filters to be displayed in Google Play Store. So whenever application where whenever a mobile device with operating system, like for example Android, which has operating system less than like which has SDKs less than 24, are not being able to download your application. Okay, so this is the concept. So this is the target SDK version is the API level you are targeting, the API level your application is built with or tested with, you know. So you are testing particularly on you're running your application in this, you are testing your application, you are compiling your application. I mean, like, you are pretty much targeting your the software development kit of this version of like mobile devices of this version, you know. Okay, so what is the version code? Version code it specifies the version code of your app. So every time an update needed to be made to your application, the version code need to be increased by one or more. So you know, you need to increase every time you need to update your version code by one or more. Okay, so if you want, so what is a version name? Okay, so version name, it's a user-friendly version name that is required to follow like some kind of a semantic versioning. Okay, so it is pretty much, I will give you the idea. It's like okay, XYZ. Okay, it is pretty much version in this format, guys. So XYZ format. So what is X is pretty much like X is a major version. Okay, Y is a minor version, whereas finally the Z is the patch version for this major release, you know. So you have a major release with like you can have a patch of one, or you can have a minor release of one, you know, in like pretty much in this way. So this is the standard suggested versioning of the version name, right? So, and finally we have the test instrumentation runner. This is the test runner to use for your UI is an instrumented test, you know, like UI test. And finally we have the build types. We have different build types, a release or debug, or you know, like for the moment you have the release, by default you don't need to specify debug. So under build type, a release is added that means that you like you configure your app to create a release build. Okay, so you configure your release build in this way. So like a minify enabled is false, but if this value is set to true, you will what it will do, it is gonna obfuscate or your application. The obfuscation of code is pretty much done to shrink your app size, or it's you're trying to remove unused code. And like the obfuscation step will pretty much change your source code reference to the value, like some kind of a dot b dot c, like the function will be pretty much specified here in this way. So it's like pretty much you shrink your code, shrinking is enabled here. If you minified email is true, you shrink your application code to in this format. Okay, like also a b b c, you shrink your code in this format, so it pretty much helps you to reduce or shrink your app size. And also it is good because it will avoid reverse engineering of your code. Okay, and finally, like you have so this means like you enable your prograd, you have your also prograd rules here, right? And finally you have like you also have compile options here. This is the language level of a Java source code, source compatibility, and bytecode target compatibility, source component target compatibility, bytecode, like how it is compiled with the language level of Java source code compatibility. And Kotlin options, this is a Java virtual machine library the Kotlin Gradle plugin should use, like JVM target, that the Kotlin Gradle plugin should use, is like 1.8. And you see also here build file features, build binding features is enabled here. View binding is enabled here. Okay, I will be going in detail about view binding, data binding in the respective tutorials. So now also we have the dependencies block. Okay, so here in the dependencies block, it specifies all the libraries that your app uses on top of your Android platform SDK. So I was telling you about, like, we initially download the Android platform SDK, but not only that, we have to also like our application depends on also other dependencies or libraries. Okay, so this is where you you implement your external dependencies library here. Okay, uh, so yeah, this is it. And then, okay, what is this dependencies actually? Okay, let's understand this dependencies block. So in this dependencies block, like it follows like the the Maven, if you guys is like a project object model convention of it follows Maven POM or also project object model. This model, so this model consists of actually group group id, artifact id, and finally the version id. So as you can see here, we have three sections here. These dependencies are actually pretty much added in this following this Maven POM project object model, and which is pretty much consist of group id. So this is pretty much the group id, artifact id. This section, the second one, is the artifact id, and finally you have the version id. So every library or dependencies that you added follow this Maven POM like a project object model, which is pretty much divided into group id, artifact id, and version id. So this is the basic in-depth understanding of dependencies. And what else, guys? So the build system actually locates and download these dependencies to build the app from the repositories block detailed in the gradle settings.gradle file. So we will be also discussing about this. Another important gradle file which is called settings.gradle file, if you see, it is in this format. So pretty much like, you know, the libraries that we have, the dependencies that we have pretty much declared here are pretty much downloaded by following through like uh, following through the this block, you know, downloaded from this dependencies repositories block, you know. So it's like pretty much here in the like, so it's pretty much downloaded from the Google's repositories, Maven repositories, you know, like Maven Central, you know, like plugin management is done by from like all those is like downloaded from these repositories, whereas resolution management, like, you know, the dependencies are managed by this repo, like they are downloaded from these repositories. All right. So, and another important concept, guys, that you have to understand is what is this implementation? Why is implementation? The implementation notation for adding this library means that this their internal dependency will not be exposed to your application. So that means the compilation will be much faster. So that means the internal dependency will not be exposed. You know, the internal dependencies of this library are not exposed. So you don't need to know the internal dependencies, what, how it is making it, you know. You only use this application without exposing this internal dependencies. Like it's kind of like it's not exposing its internal dependencies, you know. So whatever dependencies it has is not getting exposed. So it is pretty much just only implementing this, the implementation part is done here. Okay, so is implementing this particular library, you know, the all the is accessing the kind of interface. What is doing is not it doesn't care about what dependencies it is using, you know. So this is the concept. So that this kind of implementation makes compilation much more faster. So and okay, finally, uh, as you can see here, Android X core, you know, here uh, the implementation of this may Android X components, actually here the Android X components are added as a dependency rather than the Android platform source. So that means the Android platform source, uh, which it's Android X is dependent on Android platform source, which is not being added here, you know. Only Android X core depend components are being added here. Okay, and yeah, that's it, guys. So finally, uh, uh, we have implemented, we have understood the Gradle in detail. Okay, before closing this, I want to also add one more thing, is like as you can see here, the interesting thing is like when we created our simple application, we have just only one app, one module, okay, which is called app module. This but when you your application becomes more complicated, or when your application is more complex, or when your application is more advanced, you can have also add more features. Okay, like you can add more modules, you know, other modules, like, you know, more feature modules, like for example features doing like accessing a map, or feature that is doing payment, or feature that is doing something, you know, which is pretty much separate. Okay, so so when you add more features, you need to add new modules. Okay, so that are dedicated to containing the source of the feature. So that means this module will be pretty much dedicated to that feature doing that particular action, like payment, or scanning, or maybe the anything, you know, like searching, you know. Yeah, you can have a module for just searching your entire application, you know, contents in your entire application, you know, such kind of things. So these are called feature modules. Okay, so if you can see here, you can have like instant dynamic feature module, you know, dynamic feature module, you see here, like you can also do that. Okay, so these are called feature modules, and you can supplement them with other types of modules, such as like shared modules also, like networking models, so actually, when you create these feature models, like all these repositories of the plugin dependencies to download from the separate block of plugin. So actually, if you create a separate feature model, everything will be created from like it will have also another build gradle file, like it's separate build gradle file. So this is the concept that I want to make you understand, is whenever you create a separate feature model, your feature model will have its independent build.gradle file dedicated to that module. Okay, so this is the concept. And yes, and what else? Yeah, and finally, this about this settings at Gradle build file. As you can see here, this is a repositories mode that is set to for fail on project repos. Okay, this ensures all the dependencies repos are defined here, otherwise a build error will be triggered. So that means all the repositories will be defined, all dependency repos are defined here, otherwise the build error will be triggered. So wherever your application like dependencies are downloaded, all these dependencies are you're downloading should be the repositories are defined here, otherwise like a build error will be triggered. So if you are trying to download a repository, you are trying to implement a dependency which is not defined, the repository is not defined here, then you are not being able to implement or download these repositories, and error is build error will be triggered. Okay, so this is another interesting concept, guys. And I hope I have explained enough of this in detail, in depth about build gradle, and hope you like it. And if you like it, please do subscribe and support me, guys. And if you have any questions or comments, please write me down, and catch you in the next lecture. And thank you very much.